Your parents came here in 1922. What was Lacoochee like in 1922? And you weren't even born yet,
Oh,
right?
yeah, I was born in 1925, but Lacoochee was a little rough and ready redneck sawmill town. And when I say rough and ready, that's just exactly what it was. And I talk about the rednecks. That's what Lacoochee was rednecks. And they worked hard 5 days a week, and they worked a half a day on Saturday. And they worked side by side. The blacks and the whites worked side by side. And there was absolutely, in the years that I came up, was no animosity between any of them, and there was no problem. They worked hard. They worked 8 hours a day. They got paid 10 cents an hour, and even though $4.40 a week doesn't sound like much now, it was a lot of money then. On Friday nights that's when the rough and ready would come in. They would get a few beers in them and get a few fights in them and get a few knives stuck in them. And then Dr. Cannon for a while and Dr. Walters later on would patch them up. Monday morning they'd get on the same truck and go back to work.
Was that the plant back there, the old plant where the folks worked?
They had three plants. They had the one you see behind me here is a crate mill. They made wire-bound boxes that shipped Florida fruit all over the world. And in the mill, the biggest mill was a sawmill, which they made cypress boards out of. And the cypress lumber was shipped everywhere too. And then they had the planer mill. The planer mill is the one that put the surface on the boards that they sent off. Cypress was a well-liked product, and it went everywhere.
Now, you mentioned the way the housing was set up, and it's very nicely done in the photograph. Do you want to point out some unique things about the photograph that really give a sense of the way life was back in the 20s?
Well, it was a busy area. We had this is the boss's row right here, and that's where the superintendent and the foreman stayed. And it was not separate, just the way that the better houses. This was the pay office. They paid Friday. They paid $4.40 in cash.
In cash.
In a little envelope. I'll show you one in a minute. And every man got his money, and that was it. The commissary, is this building right here. That was the commissary, and they sold food to the employees with a little book. And this is the white quarters, and then right here, right next to it was the colored quarters. And in the town of Lacoochee, if you can see it a little bit, this is the town of Lacoochee back here. That one particular building was a two-story building, and it was run by a guy named Greek Starius. And the reason they called him Greek Gus, he was a Greek, and Gus was his name, and we had one from Trilby named Gus also, so they dabbed him as Trilby Gus. That's how we kept our two Gus's apart. These houses all back here, all in back of it was individually owned houses. And the thing about it is that they didn't have any water, and they didn't have any lights. The mill company all had water and had lights, and the individual houses didn't have very much. There wasn't very much lighting then, and water was with a spigot, with a pump, not with a spigot. You had to pump your water. And when Florida Power back in those days was a ruling power company, and if you wanted power, you had to pay for the poles and pay for the wire and guarantee them so much revenue a month, and nobody could do it. $4.40, you didn't have much money left over. So most of Lacoochee lived on kerosene and firewood.
There's some old Model Ts in that picture, I see. So
Oh yeah.
Very few people had cars back then.
No, there wasn't but about 4 cars in Lacoochee that I can remember altogether. And back in the 20s when I was coming up,
And
very few.
People got around on horseback.
Well, the horseback was popular with those who had horses, but 80% of those people walked. they would walk to the mill. The houses were close enough they could walk. They'd walk to the mill, and those that walked used to carry a dinner bucket with them, or carry a bag of sandwiches or lunch meat or something, because they didn't have time to walk home and walk back.
You said that aside from this booming industry, moonshine was a big business.
Oh
in
Lord,
Lacoochee.
yeah, that was one of the #1 businesses in Lacoochee. They'd come up there on Saturday night and Friday night, and they'd park their wagons and mules on behind the business district, and sometimes they got a little intoxicated, and they'd put them in their wagon and hit the mule or the horse, and the mule or the horse would take them home. One of them went as far out as Clay Sink, which was 6 miles away.
You have a really wonderful photograph of your father's general store.
They called it a drugstore, but it wasn't drugs. It was patent medicine and a little bit of everything. The way he devised the store was when he opened the store, he had different things, and then the wives and the husband would say, "Abe, why don't you put this in? Abe, why don't you put that?" Well, if you got enough Abes, why don't you? He would put it in the store, and that's how he devised what he was going to do.
Let's go see the store.
Okay.
Cities were impacted by the Depression. What was Lacoochee like during the Depression? Did people know there was a Depression?
Oh, good gosh, yeah. The mill ran as much as it could run during the Depression. It didn't close down immediately. And one of the big factors I want to bring up about the Depression is that the Lacoochee teachers, school teachers, never had to take scrip. Lacoochee school teachers always got paid because Cummer always paid their taxes. And the Lacoochee School District got their tax money and paid their teachers. It was pretty bad during the Depression. We had a lot of fish, we had a lot of chicken, we had a lot of egg, and I can remember that the government sent in a trainload of flour, big bags of flour, 20-pound bags of flour, but didn't send any yeast with it. So my dad went up and down the streets of Lacoochee, as little as they were and as poor as they were, and took up nickels and dimes and quarters, and every time that they would give them they took the money and bought yeast with it so it would rise, and when they give them a sack of powder, they gave them a can of yeast to go with it so they could make bread out of it. Nobody ever starved though. We had too many quail and too many deer and too many fish and too many, they used to eat gophers. The gopher was a staple in Lacoochee for a lot of people. It's an endangered species now, but then it wasn't. They had soft-shelled turtles, they had alligators, they had rabbits and squirrel. It was bad, but it wasn't as bad as it was in some places.
You know, all of us have certain memories that stick out in our mind, 50, 60 years later. I know I do. I'm getting up in years myself, and I can remember some things when I was a teenager. What really sticks out in your mind, something that would come to mind as an activity or experience you had here when you were young, that gives you a sense of the flavor of the community life at that time?
Oh, well, the friendships that we made in the 20s and the 30s are still there. Friends that have gone and been separated. We have a Lacoochee party every year, and people who have not seen each other for 60 years, when they come back to the party, when they put the name tag on and the cobwebs of 40 and 50 years wipe away, it's just like it was the friendship party, just like it was when you left them 40 and 50 years ago.